railway, like the signal points. Fine as far as it goes, but basically what it's good for and what it's bad for depends on what it's actually modelling. So it models power, responsibility and ultimately blame, and it's very good for that. It doesn't model some really quite important stuff like what the organisation does and how it does it and the process and structures it uses to do that. So our colourful bag of knitting on the left hand side is VSM, which looks horribly complex but is actually quite simple, and I'll go through that. One of the issues we have with VSM is that as a graphical model it's a bit of a nightmare, so trying to actually work with normal people using this model is quite difficult. So there's a whole art in practice of doing the translation. So as a technical model it's brilliant, but you've got to know how to play with it really. So Stafford, who developed this model, was interested in building a science of organisation. So he was actually on the same quest as the complex systems and the complexity guys. So he was after the invariant laws of organisation that would underpin any type of organisation. And it models quite a lot of stuff that the hierarchical model doesn't. So structures, processes, how we take decisions, communication, information, how the organisation changes. The last one's quite interesting because Nicky and I were talking about this just. Nicky's doing a panel session, aren't you, in COSI, so the systems engineering group, and I'm doing a session in the summer at a design conference, and the sort of precept of a lot of disciplines is it's like designing a thing that's a machine that's going to work, and of course what we're talking about from the systems point of view is we're designing things that actually design themselves, so that and decide where they're going to go for themselves. So the whole sort of way of thinking is quite different. We sort of tend to use this as a graphical model, but actually what it represents is a set of complexity equations. So this is all about how the management deals with an organisation that is more complex than it is, and how the organisation deals with an environment that's more complex than it is. So go through how that's made up. So we start typically with a set of primary activities, so separating out the things that the organisation does that deliver value into the external environment, and separating those from the things that it needs to do to keep itself in being. So Steve, who very helpfully sorted out the sort of logistics for this room and extra chairs because we got more people than we thought we were going to get and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of not primary for a business school, but it's still essential. So the primary is not about whether it's important or not. It's a statement of the purpose of the system. And then typically we break that down level by level. So take the system as a whole, we say what are the subsystems within that and what are the subsystems within those and so on and so forth. So you can do this in a decomposition way, or you can do it in a building up way. So more and more we're getting asked to do, how do we understand groups of organisations, how do we understand where, for example, BAE Systems works with Babcock, works with Rolls-Royce, works with the MOD. And in that case you're modelling it from the bottom up, how those things work together. In organisations that's split by dealing with different types of complexity in the environment. So we're either splitting by doing different tasks, or serving different customers, or doing it in a different geography, or by time. So loads and loads and loads of corporate restructures, organisation restructures are about shifting the order in which we deal with those different types of complexity. And it has a massive, massive difference on what the organisation is good at and what it can't. Having done that breakdown, we then look at the mechanisms to start to build this back up into a coherent system. So the first of these is coordination, system 2 in pure VSM speak. So this is the set of mechanisms you need to start operation 1 screwing things up for operation 2. And it tends to be quite some passive things, so schedules, common standards, common languages, all that sort of stuff. The importance of this is massively underestimated in organisations. So where this is missing, which is almost always, loads of it is missing, you get massive amounts of friction in the organisation. So a lot of the stuff in the lean world, Tony, is about this, isn't it? Yeah. It's about actually getting that coordination working. So where that breaks down, yes, classic set of symptoms, so conflict over resources, because we both on those. Conflict over turf, who's going to do what, conflicting messages to customers, so partner A says you can have it next week, and partner B says, well, we're not starting our bit until next month. Weak operations planning, so all that stuff that's in lean around bottlenecks and smoothing the flow and all that sort of stuff is here. And where this breaks down, what we then get is the start of the systemic collapse. So appeals to higher levels of management to sort of spats out. So where we get fights between two operational units, it tends to escalate. And of course they get pulled down into sorting out operational stuff rather than doing the job they're supposed to be doing. So then we've got, in this iconography, so the circles are primary activities, the boxes are about management, and a bit of management which is really about deciding stuff about these operations and actually ensuring that they deliver what the organisation as a whole needs. So one of the nice things about VSM is it's how kind of forensic it can be quite easily in a way that's very, very difficult with anything else. So we're looking at specific linkages between decisions about operations and those operations. Typically when you go into organisations and you ask them for information about the operations, they haven't actually got a clue what data they have is data about. So it isn't technically, it's not data, it's just sort of numbers free floating. So the relationship here is kind of the spinal one in organisations. It's about agreeing performance, measuring performance, and the resources that go with this. So this vertical relationship between the management of the team, say, and the management of the department that team's in is the spinal one in any organisation. Lots of stuff goes wrong here. So one of the key ones is fragmentation. So we end up having split conversations. So I'd have if I was answerable to Tony for performance and Bill for resources, in Tony's interest to sort of screw me on performance, it's Bill's interest to squeeze me on resource, and I get sort of sandwiched in the middle. This fragmentation is kind of built into a lot of management theories. So we've just been doing a paper for Performance Management Association conference in the summer, and they don't recognise that whole area of management structurally splits performance from resource. So they talk about them as if they're completely different things. I mean, this is not rocket science, because I mean you can't, without the resource you can't deliver performance. But typically this is split. This is the quickest way to break people, teams, departments. So Christoph, who's an occupational physician who comes to these sessions mostly in London, because he's London-based. His record is 9 people in the same role broken by this before anybody noticed the pattern. Really, really, really quick way to snap people. Another thing that goes wrong with this is incredibly common. Something happens in the environment to change demand. Operations react to that. Management senses that something's shifted and worries about the loss of control, and demands more and more reporting from the operations. You get a kind of two-level fracture there, two-level failure. So the operations guys are spending half the time fighting off senior management, and the senior guys are failing to deal with the strategic issue that they were supposed to be dealing with. That's kind of their job. I've never been in an organisation where you can't see this happening. And all structural. So we tend to think of people as sort of control freaks as this happens, but it is kind of systemic. The way out of it is this little known thing, and this appears almost nowhere in management theory, monitoring loop. So this bypasses the level of management And its function really is to partly to ensure that you understand qualitatively performance reporting. So you're going from this level, let's say department manager, and actually looking at what happens on the ground in the operations. So it's about deepening your understanding of that, and done well, this builds trust in organisations really well. Done badly, it'll break it faster than anything you can think of. But the relationship of trust that it can build or break is two-way. So this is, in one sense, about enabling management at this level to trust what they're being told because they've been down there to look at it. And at another level, it's about these guys down here trusting that management actually understands them. So I had a client about a mile down the road from here, quite a big organisation, and two managers in that, really, really good mates. One of them got promoted to director over the other manager, and the director never did monitoring, so never actually looked at what was happening in the operations, and that relationship broke down within about 2 months. And it broke down because the director was coming up with a strategy for the department, and the guys in the department were saying, never been here, she doesn't know what she's talking about, why would we trust the strategy? And of course the manager gets sandwiched in the middle. Yeah? Do I go with my team who are actually going to deliver something, or do I go with the manager? Yeah. So in VSM, the structure around managing, getting the thing to actually deliver is really, really quite a simple recipe. We've got a set of relationships around agreeing and measuring performance. We've got a set of relationships about getting resources and monitoring to check that that works. And if all we were interested in was building a machine to actually deliver something, that would be just fine and dandy. But as one potential client said to me this week, but that requires a God function, doesn't it? You know, it always requires some sort of Deus ex machina to say, yeah, it shall be thus. So what we're interested in VSM is how that gets decided. So the next bit of management is completely different, and it's looking outside and into the future. So typically surveying technical, competitive market developments, predicting planning the future, doing R&D, innovation, and strategic risk. So it requires a completely different mindset, a completely different way of thinking, and you find that people who are really, really good at this tend to be not as hot at that, and vice versa. Yeah. Timescales are different, the information is different, the softness of the information, because of course we're talking about the future, we're dealing with predictions and forecasts, and they are always questionable. So the quality of it is quite different. And where that breaks down, classic set of symptoms. So basically, the fit with the environment goes. Big one for us, but you can actually see this. Steve, kill the lights, mate. Can you? No, don't mind. So, the S&P 500, top 500 companies in the US, 85% of those have gone out of business in 40 years. Couldn't resist the photo, but you can hardly see it. Guy camping out in the bush, and until his mate takes the flash photo, you can't see the five lines waits where they camp. 30, this is a study from a bunch of guys in Bath, 35% fatal strategic risk to organisations came from the direction we went in. And by the time you spot it, it's often too late. We're fighting a rear guard action at the moment with a client who this was visible 3 years ago, and they failed to act. They failed to act well, and we've been trying to play catch up on this ever since. And of course, the world is getting away from them faster than they're reacting to it now. It's really, really scary to watch. So in VSM, good decision making is about a balance between that looking out and into the future, this looking at what we're actually capable of doing internally. And major role of governance is maintaining that balance, so managing that through time, which is a tricky thing to pull off. So the tension that's created in decision making in individuals and in groups, so in organisation boards, by trying to maintain that at this part, trying to maintain the different types of conversation that goes on is one of the trickiest things. Trying to do that, let's run the thing efficiently and change it at the same time is the hardest managerial task. In a lot of industries, people kind of give up on that and just say, we'll run it like a machine, and when the fit with the environment breaks, then we just close it down and start again. Yeah, because for a lot of people find that easier. And the way that works as a decision-making thing is part of how the identity of the organisation gets built. And that has a massive effect on how we actually see ourselves, and what strategies we can actually envisage and carry out. So if you think about a typical decision around developing a new product, for example, it needs a set of conversations. A conversation with the operations guys, can we actually deliver that? Have we got the people? Have we got the money? No, but could we develop people or get the means in? Can we get the long-term financing right? How's that going to work through time? And we tend to want to put these things in linear pathways. So we try to do strategic planning as a linear thought process. And of course, you can see with this sort of conversational situation that you might need to loop around that many times to actually come up with a result. And as soon as we try and do that linear planning, impose that linear planning process on, you foreclose options and you make it really, really difficult to actually run this as a decision space. Not hard to do, but we in our sort of drive for full logic, that tends to break it. This is actually a very, very natural, normal social process, but in management we tend to break that. And that's VSM. So reliable systems are made up of reliable systems. The whole objective is to create organisations that are ultra stable, capable of adapting to changes in the environment, capable of actually designing organisations that are capable of formulating strategy rather than just actually enacting it. The complexity of the model comes really from the fractal recursive structure, so you've got the same basic set of rules at every level, from organisation to division to department to whatever it might be, service or whatever. So that's that.